Hey all, back for a January-February update, and I was focused on getting some work done to get the Central Valley ties down. The first thing was to put in some super elevation. It's my first time attempting this. Put down some basswood, 6 inches scale high, tacked it down with some 1/2 inch nails, glued it, let it dry, and then sanded it down to get the right profile to get up to the curve. Took me a few attempts to get it right, and I put a test train on with some temporary Atlas track to work it back and forth till I had the look I wanted. So once I was happy with that, I started the work to prep the Central Valley ties. And the first step there is to clip off all those little nubs at the end that come from the casting process and fasten all the sections together. Some styrene glue, just glue on top, bottom half of one section and glue the top half of the next section on. Once all the sections are joined, you basically have railless flex track that you can make as long as you want. Next was time to actually lay rail on the ties. Cleaning off the ends of the rails, have a good joint with the next rail up there, curving the rail so it fits the radius of the curve here in front of me. Next, I'll bend over a few of the spikes to hold the rail in place. I'm doing that with a little nail set right there. And the white tab you see there in the corner is a spacer to make sure I don't have my rails butted right next to one another. The basement was pretty dry when I recorded this, probably about 40% humidity, 41%, which is probably about as dry as it's going to get. I've seen a little lower, but not much. And the reason that's important is because Homosote will contract when it's dry and expand when it is moist. And I just want to make sure we have a little bit of gap there, so in case it contracts, I don't have rail that pops out of its connectors, of its spikes. So through this sequence, I am cutting a little notch in the Central Valley ties to allow room for the microengineering joiner. And the blade I'm using is just a simple abrasive blade at Dremel cells. It's not the most efficient tool for cutting plastic. It just kind of melts it out of the way. That's why I'm using the knife to kind of clear out the melted pieces, parts that are left over. But it's fairly accurate, so I can cut right inside the shoulder of the tie plate and make it just wide enough for the joiner to fit down into. And that means the joiner will be partially hidden by the spike and tie plate detail. Nice feature, the microengineering joiner, that is. Now I'll move on to next rail, get it flush cutted, polish up in the end for good joint connection, and keep repeating. Through this sequence, I am cutting away some of the rail clamps. So rail clamps are those things that are on real railroads to keep the rail from creeping along the right-of-way. And Central Valley molds those into every 6th or 7th tie. And some ties have 2 clamps. And so what I was doing here is cutting off the clamps where they had double clamps, and I was cutting off the clamps that were on the wrong side of the tie. So clamps are typically on the same side of the tie that the train is approaching from. So I'm cutting out the ones on the trailing side of the tie because that matches what the Norfolk and Western did, at least through Circleville during that time. The tool I'm using is a Xuron micro shear. It does a nice job of just cutting nice and flush against the tie. After cleaning up, I'll go through with a paint pen and cover up the places where the plastics turn white due to the cutting. And all this process got me thinking about how I wanted to join the rail going forward. So I started experimenting with using different approaches. This is phosphor bronze wires soldered to one end of the rail, and you can slide the next rail over that. Nice locating ability. Then I started experimenting with sheet brass that's cut down to the right height so it fits in the web. Same approach, just solder that on one end and slide the next rail into it. I like this. I think it locates the rail well. I like the way it looks, so I'll probably keep on doing that. But another video on that later. Thanks for watching.